My guest today, Olga Chepelianskaia, is an international sustainability expert and founder of UNICITI. Her brand approach is to help Asian cities become vibrant, sustainable, climate resilient, economically dynamic, inclusive, and culturally unique by placing their cultural and natural assets at the core of their development. In 15 years of her professional engagement, she managed 7 international programs, covered over 20 cities and 40 countries, and worked with many leading international institutions. In this episode, we learned about insights and lessons from her journey so far. She shared her vision about uniqueness in cities and a passion for culture and heritage and its connection to sustainability and climate resilience. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm Asban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I'm bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Olga. Hello, good to see you. I'm so much happy to reconnect with you again after the Peshawar talk. And tell me, how are you and how's it going and where are you right now?
Yes, hello, Asba. It's great to see you as well. In fact, it's been a few months since that discussion we had together. So right now I'm in Thailand, and you know that I'm passionate about Asia. So I was based in India for a long time, but now Thailand for a few months, and then we will see where it leads us.
Awesome. Yes, it excites me, and I really want to know more about your passion for Asian cities and your work. So let's start with the questions. Tell me about Unicity and how come you get committed to Asian cities all the way from Russia.
Right. So first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me for this. I appreciate this opportunity to share if you insights here. Coming to your question on how I got into Asian cities, all the way from Russia, as you say. So Russia is actually as Asian as it is European, geographically, but also culturally. So I was connected to Asia in a way by being born in Siberia, by having my mother who was born in Kazakhstan. So I used to go to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and getting connected to Central Asia initially. So later on, when I was 12 years old, I moved to France, to the city of the south of France in Toulouse, which is called the Brick City because many buildings are built with brick, which is also known as the Airbus City because Airbus has its assembling institution in there. And so, living in this relatively small, definitely small by Asian standards city, I got exposed to living in an ancient historical city. And it was just fascinating, to be in this atmosphere, to look at buildings which tell you stories of ancient times. And the interesting thing was that as I was visiting different cities in Western Europe, I could see this unique identity that I could experience in each of these cities. And so at the same time, my fascination for Asia was there. And I really had that strong desire to work with Asia as I gradually became a professional and started working. And when I got this opportunity from 2010 onwards, I very quickly realized that the way Asian cities are getting built today does not at all reflect this tremendous cultural richness of the Asian region. When you look at it, not only Asian countries are extremely different, extremely rich in culture and languages, but within each country, you have so much that you can learn from, that you can share. And so, while all of this is there, on the other hand, in terms of the urban layout, the urban fabric, you just see these uniform buildings, these urban jungles in most places. And I just found it extremely painful, to be honest, because I wanted to see this diversity when you just walk in the street, not only when you go to the museum. And this was not happening. This immersive, living experience that you get when you live in a pretty much any historical city in Europe, it's quite difficult to get in Asia, although you also do have historic cores, but these ones are not as easy access as it is in the West. So they may be living quarters, but the comfort of being there is not at all what I used to experience. And so I felt gradually that I really want to bring this uniqueness back to Asian cities. And I guess this is what also led me to founding UNICITI, which means uniqueness in cities. So uniqueness is really the core of what we do, and we focus on Asia pretty much. So this is my story in short, you can say.
Great, very inspiring, and I'm glad to know more about you through this question. That where you were born and your family and your ancestors about. Okay, so for more clarity and for direct answer, I would like to ask you that explain your vision and purpose behind building unique cities. How do you envision this movement?
Sorry, can you just repeat again?
Explain your vision and purpose behind building unique cities. How do you envision this movement?
Right. So the vision, as I said, is to have each city speak for itself, speak from its roots, speak from its culture, speak from its people, its diversity of people. And for the city to speak in such a way, this should reflect in the urban layout. And so this is the vision that drives me, that each city is unique in itself. And so the interesting thing is that uniqueness is, it's not something that is only visual and it ends there. Uniqueness comes from where? It comes from getting connected to the local context, right? And from the different elements of this local context, you create naturally, because these elements, the combination of these elements rather can only be unique, and you create this unique environment. And so therefore, when you have this approach, this uniqueness driven approach, you're bound to be sustainable, because this means that you're going to use building materials that are relevant to your area, that are available to your area. Hence, you are not carrying them hundreds of kilometers away from and generate carbon emissions. This means that you respect your natural ecosystem. So it means that you build in a way that you still have access to water on your own side. And again, you don't bring it back from, you don't bring it from 300 or sometimes 600 kilometers away. You have your own sources of water. It means you have your own sources of shading because you have trees around you. So when you build in this unique way, then obviously you're going to be sustainable, you're going to be climate resilient, and you're going to be competitive and appealing today. Because when you create this thriving, unique, and quality of life context, then of course it will drive people there, and it will be people from different qualifications, from different backgrounds, different inspirations. So you can create this thriving environment in a city, which I doubt you can do if your surrounding context is not of that quality going forward, considering that now more and more we can work online, we can work remotely, and we don't depend on cities for our livelihood. At least for qualified people, you depend on it less and less. So cities will have to compete for quality human resources, and they will have to offer something that brings them there. So this is the vision I have, to bring uniqueness back to cities so that they are sustainable and they are thriving in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. I agree to it. And we must advocate for it, especially the professionals who are aware of what it's going to happen now. And it can it can put the foundations for the future as well. Definitely. Okay, so I have observed your passion for heritage and you link the past to future. Why is it important for you and for us, particularly your love for ancient architecture? Share about that.
Okay, with pleasure. So see, ancient buildings, they actually speak to us, and they speak to us in a way that they convey to us the essence of the time where they came from. See, I'll take a couple of examples from the French architecture. If you look at the classical French architecture in cities of the 17th century, it very much reflects this search for order, this search for clear vision in life, which was also reflected at that time by philosophy. If you look at philosophers such as Descartes, who were exactly looking for that. So architecture became reflection of that time. A little later in the same 17th century, you got the Baroque style, which is all the contrary of classical style, which is exuberance, which is the wild flow of life. So you can see those waves of how people were perceiving the world at that time. If you move a little forward in time, you look at the 19th century, all the new poetry, new painting, impressionist movement. So that's reflected in architecture as well, where you have Art Nouveau, for example, at the end of the 19th century, where you have, this kind of flowing facades and buildings. And so now what happens when you walk in a city and you can see the combination, because a city is a living organism. So if you are in that historical city, so all those layers of the past, they're in front of you. You get immersed into them. And in a way, it's a kind of, getting out of time and touching to eternity, which really makes your life meaningful of being there. And, this is the beauty of architecture, that for some other artworks, you need to go to a museum, you need to go to a theater. But here is just living art that's in front of you, that connects you to your past, that can project you to your future. And this is very important. As human beings, we need food, we need shelter to survive, but actually we need beauty and inspiration to live. So if we want to live to the fullest of the human potential, we need this visual and emotional imprint around us. And this counts tremendously. So heritage gives us this. And what I want the most is that today's buildings, they also become heritage of tomorrow and have this value. So this is where we have a bit of an issue, because this is not how it is happening. And in fact, if you look at it, we are bringing buildings down much faster than it used to be. So there can be a variety of reasons for that. But not only it is unsustainable, but also we are not keeping this track of time and not leaving the imprint of our unique time, because we just build very uniform. So this is also something we may want to reflect upon.
Yes, definitely. I agree to it. Olga, share your passion and inspiration for sustainable urban development and climate resilience.
Okay, thank you for this question, Asba. So I'll share a few personal things that of my journey that I don't get to share so often online. So since I grew in France, I still felt quite connected to my motherland, which is Russia, but at that time it was Soviet Union, so the entire CIS region. And in fact, my first job was in the French embassy in Moscow, where in the microeconomic department, we were covering the CIS countries. And so the way I chose my career was because I wanted to be connected to this region and I wanted to do something meaningful and impactful. So this is how my first professional opportunity came up. And in that realm, I already started working a little bit on energy. And then after that, I moved to the UNECE, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, based in Geneva, where we work dedicatedly on mitigating climate change through clean energy. So clean energy is both energy efficiency, efficiently using existing resources, and renewable energy. And in that realm, climate mitigation was addressed. For these countries, it was, for the participating countries, it was equally important to reduce the energy resource for the environment as reduce the energy consumption for economic reasons, because primary energy sources became quite more expensive for these countries with time. Equipment was quite outdated. There were losses up to 30% in the chain of power production, for example. And acting on it was having a major economic impact, positive economic impact on the countries. So this was my first approach to climate change in climate mitigation. But then After this project, I also got the opportunity to work with the United Nations Commission, Socioeconomic Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNSCOP, in Bangkok. And there I saw that, especially in Asia, while climate mitigation is important, including for economic reasons, as I gave you an example, but many of these countries already face the effect of climate change. And as a result, climate adaptation is actually the need of the hour. So climate mitigation is something that will mitigate the impact of climate change in the future, but whatever climate change has happened is already hitting Asian countries and Asian cities. So one country with which I'm working currently, the Philippines, is really in the top 5 of most vulnerable countries, with dozens of typhoons a year that affect this country and consequently its cities. As you know, Pakistan is also in the top 10 of most affected countries. Bangladesh is in the top 5, India again is in the top 10. So many Asian cities and countries are at the forefront of climate change. So climate adaptation came to the picture as well. And then while working in Bangkok, I was lucky to get introduced to a project on sustainable urban development. And I must say it was love at first sight. This urban scale, which before I was working at country level, and then realizing how much you can actually do at an urban scale, because an urban scale is like a micro world where with targeted actions, you can really see tangible outcome on citizens, on their daily life. So I was really fascinated by this scale, and since then I stayed in it. Coming to climate change, so all the learnings that I got from my career led us at UNICITI to develop quite a robust approach and methodology on how do we help cities become climate resilient. So this starts with climate modeling, where you actually look at how climate is going to evolve at a very specific location, and with impact climate modeling, where you look at hydrological modeling, drought modeling, landslide modeling, so that you can understand how exactly climate change is going to spatially impact the city. Because the city decision maker, if you only give them climate figures, how precipitation is going to evolve, how temperature is going to evolve, it's not enough for them to know how to act, because they need to first translate it into what are the risks for my territory. So you look at the hazard risks, and you also look at exposure and vulnerability of different assets, social assets, economic assets, how different categories of population are affected, how infrastructure is affected. So, and not only how they are affected today, but how likely they are to be affected in the future, to what extent. So this becomes a very powerful planning tool, because then the city, based on this quantitative information, can take very informed decision of what kind of risk and what level of risk they want to avoid. And this is where at UNICITI we utilize this, again, this uniqueness-based approach, where we will first see what kind of actions can help the city become climate resilient and low carbon by tapping into the strengths of the city's unique natural and cultural assets. So to give you an example, when you have floods, often it means that the built-up area is too important compared to natural ecosystems. So there are less spaces in the city which are able to absorb the water. And of course, the drainage system also can be a part of the equation, but cities such as Singapore, you see, Singapore is quite densely built, and it is a densely populated city. But at the same time, I think nearly 50% of their territory are green and blue ecosystems, and they're aiming at bringing it exactly to 50% by 2030. And then even whenever they get the opportunity, they continue increasing natural spaces. So on the other hand, many developing Asian cities, totally the opposite is happening, where you want to build as much as possible, and you lock the potential of those assets. So what we will do when we talk with the city about how we allow the city to become resilient, we look into what natural assets can be reactivated. And so the beauty of it is that not only it helps you address climate change, but it has a number of other co-benefits. Like say if you keep a green area and you create a natural park, so it can absorb water during the monsoon, but all the other times people can use it as a public space. So your money is not only going into addressing one specific issue which happens at certain times of the year, but it creates a benefit where the city has green lungs, where you get shade, you get to enjoy the space, you get to spend time in it. So these kind of interventions, which are usually low cost, because often you just need to regulate development. This much is a very effective tool. It's not a tool that is used often by cities, but it has huge potential. So comparatively low cost and a number of co-benefits. So once you identify these actions, then on the top of them, you can bring in engineering solutions, which yes, are needed, but the order is extremely important. If you start with engineering solutions, how do I pump water out? Let me buy pumping stations. Then cities which have scarce financial resources, which is the case in most cities, I would say, your resources are only going into that, and the pumping, pumping facility will only pump water. It will not give you any other benefit. So you want to put it on the top where no natural asset-based solution is available, so that you top it up, but not the opposite. So this is something that we are very passionate about, doing it at this scale. And coming to urban, so as I was saying, I got this opportunity to be introduced to an urban project, and I really stayed in the urban realm after that. So one of the initiatives that we launched about a year ago is called the Third Way of Building Asian Cities, which is built upon our research on building unique cities. So we conducted about a year of research of why uniqueness is so important and on how to incorporate it into the city practices. And so that led us to this program, a Third Way of Building Asian Cities, where as of now we have over 100 professionals, and they are across the world in about 35 countries. So we have senior professionals who guide research in specific topics at building level, neighborhood, city level, and policy and financial mechanism levels. And we have younger professionals who support their work and this research. So such movements are very important. And I also learned something from this movement, now that it's been going on for a bit over a year, is how many young people are passionate. And even mid-career people, senior people who joined us to support this. This program is entirely pro bono for the moment. We are all giving our time for this. And it's very inspiring to see that people joined it, and some of them stayed for over a year with us by now, because they really want this impact to happen. So, this is, while I had initial inspiration, I think this continues giving more and more inspiration to see how much it matters for people.
Yes, definitely. And I just got to know about your passion, with how elaborate you were in your answer, and how you have shared your everything you have learned so far, and how much clarity you have in it. That shows your passion for it. And I love the content that you share on Unicity web pages, and I have learned a lot from it, especially Instagram and social media. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for contributing to the world, to the young professionals, to senior professionals as well. Okay, so from your content, I have just derived this question that I would like to ask you, is that if you can put into words inspiring message briefly for the SDGs that I have seen you produce the content on your channel, that would be great. So I will just ask you specifically about SDG 1, 3, 7, 11, 13, and 15. Do you want me to highlight the questions, or you remember it?
No, that's fine. Let me elaborate on this a little
Sure.
bit. So I think it's not so much a matter of which SDGs. I think it's a matter of the approach, because see what happens. The UN elaborated this SDG framework, which are global targets that the world has to reach. But now for the world to reach these targets, it means that at each specific location, one has to contribute with tangible actions. So this is where, especially since we are talking about cities here, we need to see how cities can translate SDGs into their language. What does it mean for them? Where do they stand in terms of these targets? And this is not an easy work because, as I'm sure you would know, many cities lack data. So you need some data to know where you stand. So you start with data collection, you start with understanding also which SDGs are priority for your city. You prioritize because, especially if you talk about medium and small cities, very often you just have a few officials who actually can contribute their time. So you need to use their time very wisely. And once you have this visibility on which SDGs are priority, you understand the time frame, you start elaborating the actions that could be most impactful. In this process, it's very important to involve different stakeholders because SDGs is not something you can meet top down only. And unless all stakeholders involved are owning these SDGs, it will be very difficult to meet them. So this is more something that I wanted, if I had a message on SDGs, rather than commenting on each specific one, I would say that it's a process where you downscale the SDGs at the local level so that it becomes meaningful for that specific city, that specific location, and you involve the right stakeholders so that they can eventually, the actions leading to implementing the targets can be put in place.
Yes, it makes sense to me, definitely. All right. And yeah. Okay, so moving on to next. Any valuable message for the Asian cities and the citizens overall that you have?
Yes, so maybe a message I could give is that living in a quality urban environment is a right, it's not a luxury. Often when we see governments, public institutions develop projects on affordable accommodation, for example, when you look at it, it's not human. They're, same kind of concrete boxes stuck to one to the other. There is no public space connecting them. It's not acceptable for people to live in such conditions, but it is still widely accepted, including by many development professionals, that as long as you meet your physical needs, that's okay. But a human being is much more complex and much richer than just being satisfied with a shelter. So the message I would give, that it is important that you, the citizen, are aware of the rights that you have. If you look at Europe, for example, people are used to living in certain standards. They will not compromise and go below. But in Asia, what happens, you don't have this example in front of you, or you are used to social inequality. So you just think that this is your fate and this is how you should live. But there have been many examples in different Asian cities. If citizens care about something and they claim it, it starts happening. So once you are aware and you believe truly that your right is to live in a quality urban environment, then many things can happen. See, in practice, you can request public hearings if you hear about a project which you feel is not right for that city. You can form associations, join associations which make your city better. You can write letters to the administration of your city requesting this or that. So, and even smaller actions you can take as well. Of course, the governmental process is a little heavy, but essential. But at the same time, if you just want to beautify your street, sometimes just putting a plant on your balcony, which you can see and others can see, starts creating a better living environment. Planting a tree somewhere, such small actions, they already matter a lot if more people join. So I think the message is that we should own our cities. We should feel in our cities as at home as in our apartments, because when to have that enriching living experience, it's not enough to be comfortable, in a room. You also want to step out and feel that you are at your place there. So once this awareness is there, many things are possible.
Yes, great message. Thank you very much. I love it. Okay, would you like to share any opinion or benefits you see in the placemaking movement?
So yes, for me, the making movement is exactly what brings this awareness of one's right to the quality urban fabric. Uh, to me, the way I see the placemaking movement is that it sees the city as a public space which benefits and connects to citizens and visitors between themselves, that connects them to the urban fabric. So this is essential, as I was saying. When we start feeling at home, when we start owning our city, then our life can be completely transformed. So for me, this is an extremely important message. Of course, this would translate into specific interventions, one public place, a street, and all of this contributes to this objective. But ultimately, I think what is important to understand and to convey is that, say you have a building, so this building has an owner, but at the same time this building is part of a place, and depending on how this building is, even if I don't live in this building and I don't own it, but I pass by, say, or I live somewhere in the neighborhood, or I visit, it will also influence my quality of life to quite an extent. Okay, to give you an example, say in Singapore, for example, there are quite strict regulations. If you build a building, this building should provide shelter when it rains. So on the first floor, you should have some kind of, coverage so that the person can, get covered when it rains. It also has to provide some shading, and buildings have to be connected in such a way that maximum shading is created. So when a person walks, and Singapore is a tropical climate, you should feel comfortable walking and being part of that city. So interestingly, I've been to Singapore and I've been to Bangkok, which are similar climates, with Singapore even being more humid. But the interesting thing is that when you walk in Singapore during the day, you feel much more comfortable than you feel in Bangkok, for example. And all of this is urban design, regulations, the way you set up your urban environment. So this is the point. Placemaking extends to any urban intervention, because all the city is that place where we live. And I actually like the example of Singapore in terms of design, I must say, because Singapore is completely an uninterrupted experience. You can walk from any place to any place, and you always have walking paths. You never have to fight with the cars. You never have to step over, and stumble because the road is not paved. You are comfortable because you have shading. I mean, of course, it's hot and humid, but you still feel quite okay. So you can be at your place in the city at any time of the day. And I think this is what we want to aim at with the placemaking movement.
All right. Yes, I would like to ask here that basically I'm not very much aware of the Singapore and its urban design, and so I would like to ask that does the population of Singapore as compared to India or Pakistan, as you know, not Pakistan as compared to Lahore, I would say, like any city, any metropolitan city. Is it possible to attain that level of urban design and um, the level of safety and comfort in a metropolitan city, or you know something like that? That it depends on the population and the scale of people and all the crowded areas, the issues we face here in
Right.
metropolitan city, so
Yes.
do you think is it possible to achieve that standard or not?
Yes. So in terms of crowded, Singapore is quite a dense city. I don't have the figure in mind right now, but it is maybe not as high as, you can say, density in Hong Kong. But although in Hong Kong we also have to see, because only 25% of the area are built up, the rest is protected natural parks. but it is quite high density, I believe. So Singapore is among the highest densities, you can say. And what is interesting in the Singapore example is that they've done it on their own. They used to be not quite a rich place. So when they became independent in, I believe, 65, it was, there was a whole rethinking of how the city country should get developed. Of course, and it is important to acknowledge that, yes, Singapore has some facility that many Asian countries don't have already by its size, because as of now, the national government and the municipal government are merged. There used to be a time where there used to be two different governments, but eventually they decided to just merge it. So it's a city country, you can say, which makes things much easier. But nevertheless, if you go back to the history from 60s to 80s, that was the time when Singapore was building itself up. And initially, it had that kind of a strategy that bring down the old and build the new. And I remember that moment in the 80s where they assessed the tourism statistics, and they saw that tourism is dropping every year steadily. So there was a big thinking movement of, okay, what should we do? And after that, they radically changed their perspective, and they started preserving any heritage assets they had, but at the same time creating new urban fabric in a way that it organically connects. Because, sometimes what can happen, you have a heritage building and then you have something which, just flashes the eye. So they're very attentive. It is extremely regulated. So again, this may not fit every environment, but there, for you to get a construction project approved, you need to meet many criteria which are important for the social ecosystem. So I believe that today, where developers and real estate players actually have a huge influence, and they don't always have the public interest in mind, this kind of a regulation may reveal quite helpful. But it is not possible to have it everywhere. And especially I'm thinking of countries and cities of South Asia. I think this is not a kind of a regulation we'll reach anytime soon. But what can be learned from Singapore is that coming from a city which was not so organized, which had many flaws, coming to that kind of a very flowing, interconnected city was possible. And people only did it. So everything is in our hands. Of course, we all have different levels of difficulties, and we should, each of us, each city should go through their own path and take the time that city needs. But Singapore to me shows that things are really possible.
Yes, this is what I wanted to know, that yes, there's a possibility, and this is what we can learn from Singapore. And yes, I have been hearing a lot from people about Singapore, so my current focus is to divert some of my research towards them, that what we can learn from them, and yes, someone to
Interesting.
interview from their place also.
Yes, that would be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, okay, so let's move on to the rapid questions that I ask everyone. Okay, tell me, Olga, what keeps you focused, and what keeps you focused on the work that you do? What drives you?
Mm-hmm. So, for me, I do feel very connected to this idea that a city is a public place. And I see a big gap between this vision where I want to seamlessly move throughout the city, dream, look at facades, get inspired, get energized by my environment. This is not what I'm seeing in Asia. And so this gap is something that motivates me quite a lot. Because, I often say that every construction decision we are taking has consequences for decades. Like, say, you make a painting and you don't like it, the next day you put it in the cupboard. But once you've made a building, once you've placed a road, you've placed a flyover somewhere, then you have to live with it. You can demolish, but it's not so straightforward. So at least a few decades, you'll have to bear that. So for me, I really have this sense of urgency, knowing how fast the urban infrastructure is developing in Asia. I feel that we need to act really as soon as possible. This was one of the drivers behind this program, A Third Way of Building Asian Cities. So we do not have specific funding for it at the moment, but I felt we just need to start doing something, and we'll build other support processes on the way. But you can say honestly, I feel that every minute is a lost minute to to make this change while it is still time. So this is how I see it.
Yes, and thank you so much for putting your energy into it. May you have more energy to contribute
Thank you
towards
so
it.
much.
Okay, share any proudest moment of your work life that makes you happy every time you recall it.
Right. So, to be honest, I am very impact driven. I really want to see things on the ground. At the same time, my work is more at a strategic level. So, say I'm not an architect, I'm not an urban designer. So often I admire my colleagues and mentors, architects who, they can walk me through and say, okay, this is what I put up, and this it stays there tangibly. In my work, in our work at UNICITI, so it is research work so that we can inform professionals, we can inform decision makers. We spend time analyzing cities to see how we can improve, what we can improve. So it's sometimes difficult to see the impact on the ground. But maybe one of not maybe but one of the things that I want to share, that actually gradually I started realizing how important it is. Maybe initially I was not so aware, but I see a number of young professionals who actually, they write to me, sometimes they write to Unicity, saying that some information we provided changed their career paths. For example, some people told me they chose their master thesis or master direction based on what they learned from us. Some chose their PhD topics. Some gained skills with us through this program where they got a chance to work with a reputed expert, and that allowed them to step into sustainability in their professional work and fulfill their passion. So actually, the more I think about it, the more I realize it is huge, because you actually need this kind of domino effect, that maybe you do something, another person will do something that will inspire someone else, and this is how the chain grows, and this is how impact is made. So now I value very much this fact that we can, through what we do, we can transmit something to another person who then does something else with this, and then it continues growing.
Yes, and applause for that, because definitely this is the real impact. If you can inspire someone, and somewhere down the line it makes a huge impact overall. Little impact making a huge ocean. Okay, so any hardest moment of your work life, a very struggling moment. Definitely there has been many.
Yes, of course. Maybe the one I choose to share is also connected to what I just said. Very often we spend time and we work with a lot of honesty, where we try to devise the best plan for the city. We also don't do it unrealistically. We usually work closely with the city to understand what the city has the capacity to implement. So we are not designing action plans that are ideal per se, but we design action plans that we feel, and which in the discussion of the city also we get confirmation of, the city actually can implement. But often, I must say, in the development field in which I'm working, implementation doesn't happen. So a number of projects I have done with the United Nations agencies, with other development agencies. So you produce your work, and that too I highlight. So of course, if I sat in my own room and did research, some abstract research, and handed it on, maybe it did not have to be implemented even at all. But it is a work where we go on missions with cities, we spend time with them, we coordinate, and then we produce something for them, and then it does not get implemented. So this, not only to me, it's a big kind of concern, because I feel, okay, actually I want to see impact and I spend time working on it, but now I'm not seeing it. But it's also something that I think in the development community we should spend time on reflecting upon. Because see, for example, if a city takes services of a big consulting company, I don't know, McKinsey, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they pay them a big amount of money, usually there is this understanding that, okay, if I pay this much, I want something out of it. So I think I have not conducted a comparative assessment, but I think the implementation rate is higher. Now, when you do a UN project, so usually the city gets it as a benefit. It's, the city does not have to pay for this technical assistance, and the United Nations agency in question is offering this support. So maybe there is something wrong in there in terms of the ownership, because you just, you get it. Maybe we need to go more towards demand-driven approaches, where unless we have strong and determined request from the government, we don't move, because in the development agencies, actually resources are very scarce, and with all the economic crises that have shown up lately, they are even scarcer than before. So every drop of this funding is precious, and when it comes to professionals, and then we do the work, but then it's not actually happening, this is not okay. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago, we I think should revive it. We started looking into how can a decision maker own the project. So, for example, what is in for this decision maker? So there is something for the city, but everyone is a person. And also, I'm sure you've noticed this trend at the Asian level. Decision makers would tend to have a personal agenda as well. So this is why also some development would happen where it should not happen. So if we as an international community could offer an alternative, which would be providing them more visibility, getting the citizens to know better what they're doing, so that they can get vote support or whatever it is that is important to them. This is not how we work usually in the development world, but I think we should step into kind of off track approaches to really look into maximizing the impact of what we're doing.
Yes, I agree to it, and this is something that is the most struggling part, and which even in anticipation causes me trouble or headaches, that it's not going to be implemented, and still we have to work on it, because just for the sake of awareness, bringing it to light. Okay, any quote that keeps you focused on this work? Any inspiring quotation or any inspiring word or anything like that?
Not so much quotes, but some people. I was very lucky when I lived in India for nearly 10 years, in fact, before COVID, and I may still go back there. I was very lucky to meet a few architects such as Ashok Bilal, Sanjay Prakash, who for decades dedicatedly worked not only on their projects, which are very inspiring in themselves, but also worked on intellectually formulating what is the best way forward, sharing it with many people. Both of them are supporting our program as well at the moment. And a number of such people I met through my life. And I think this is what really inspires me deep inside, to see what is possible, what my seniors have been able to achieve in tangible terms, but also in terms of bringing this light to other people, such as myself as well. So this is something that I value a lot.
Yes, definitely. The people are the best resources we have. Indeed. Okay, so do you have any opinion for Pakistan or placemaking in Pakistan that you would like to share?
I am not familiar enough, I must say, with the placemaking movement in Pakistan. I have the opportunity at the moment of working with one of the cities in Pakistan on climate change, essentially. And I do hope that I visit. I have never been to Pakistan. I would very much like to visit and see by myself how things work. I'm quite fascinated by the example of Lahore and what was done there in terms of also heritage revival. So I'd like to get exposed and experience it. Until then, it would be difficult for me to give an informed opinion. But maybe a quick insight on the project on which I'm working on. One of my findings was that data is extremely scarce. So, data is a very important tool. Of course, you can also do qualitative assessments, but if you can ground it into data, it can bring you much further. So what I noticed in this city, there is no city data available. And there is a data available at district level, but even that is not, there are data gaps which may make your analysis harder. So I was thinking that this could be one of the priorities for the country to, to address, because even if you come back to placemaking, you still want to know what are people's movements in the city, how do they utilize different places. So China, for example, is excellent with collecting data. I mean, that's another matter, because they also collect data whether you want it or not, but data is collected, and that in terms of their interventions at the city level, I must say, provides great outcomes. They really know how many people use transport, what kind of transport, at which time of the day, who is at which part of the city at which time. So they are harnessing on all of this to enhance the spaces and the usages of spaces that people want to, to utilize. So this is something I feel for Pakistan would be interesting to explore a little bit. This is just, my understanding based on this project. But again, I do hope I visit one day, and I can share more with you of my
Yeah.
impressions.
Hopefully you will, and definitely we will be honored to host you as well. And yes, I noted the point that we should be working on the data collection definitely. Okay, and lastly, any message that you have for the global professionals or leaders out there, especially the young
Mm,
ones that are joining in?
right. So I would say that if you are passionate, dedicated, and patient, anything is possible. And these three have to be there. You have to be passionate of what you do. You have to give in the work and the resources, and you have to be patient, because things don't happen overnight. This is something I learned maybe the hard way, but but I think now it's quite ingrained in my understanding. And as I said earlier, every, even smallest action in the right direction, you never know what impact it's going to create. It's like, you throw a stone in water and it creates circles, and you never know how many. And the further it goes, the bigger the circle, right? So I think this should really keep us in hard times where we maybe don't see the impact, maybe it's difficult, maybe something fails, but we should have this understanding and faith that sometimes we may not even see or know about the impact, but it is going to be there. And I think that when you have that, it holds you through the struggle times, and it makes things possible eventually.
Yes, noted. I've noted down as well because I agree to it. Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing it with us, for educating us, and for advocating for everything that you are doing. It's amazing. I really appreciate it. Thank you
You're
so
very
much.
kind. We're always trying to do better. I always feel, there is so much to cover, and it was wonderful to be part of this discussion. I really enjoyed having a discussion with you when we had the seminar a few months ago, and I hope we stay in touch. And thank you again for having me today.
Definitely. I'm honored to have you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you. Bye.